This is the Annex, a sociology podcast. I'm Dan Morrison from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. My guest today is Dr. Antar Tichavakunda, Assistant Professor of Race and Higher Education at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Antar is author of Black Campus Life, The Worlds Black Students Make at a Historically White Institution, published in 2021 by the State University of New York Press. In addition to the book, I've asked Dr. Tichavakunda to discuss his 2023 article, Critical Race Theory in Higher Education, Where We Are and Where We Need to Go, published in the edited volume Higher Education, Handbook of Theory and Research in 2023. This is a hardworking scholar we have here on the program. Today on the Annex, Black students at historically white colleges, critical race theory, and ethnography on the college campus. Stay with us. Dr. Antar Tichavakunda, welcome to the Annex.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It is my pleasure. The book was a real engaging read, really got into the world of these Black engineering students, and happy to have you talk about it. So let's start with laying out your field site and the Black students that you studied. Can you give us an overview of Westside University and the engineering students you worked with?
For sure. So yeah, of course, Westside University is a pseudonym. I'm trying to remember how many details I included, right, to anonymize the university. But what I think is really important to know is that it's a historically white institution. By historically white, I mean that its traditions, cultures, practices are steeped in whiteness, although it may not be predominantly white, right? Thinking about numbers, over 50% making a university or institution predominantly white institution, or PWI, we might think about it as a historically white institution, or HWI, which is what I often say in my text. But yeah, that's the university. And there's also a School of Engineering. The School of Engineering is what I call Caldwell. And again, I studied Black engineering students. So the School of Engineering, of course, came to fore. What's interesting about Caldwell School of Engineering is that it was minority Black. My Black students made up, I believe, 2% of the population in the School of Engineering.
Hmm.
What makes this interesting as well is that the School of Engineering was what some people call a majority minority school, right? So you have all these people of color within the School of Engineering. And what does that mean when Black students are still the extreme minority within the engineering school? And again, the Black population was also low in Westside University in general. So we have this very small Black population. I think that's what's really important to understand about the context.
I mean, one thing that your response reminds me of is Whitney Pirtle's work at UC Merced. So this is a Black feminist scholar who actually I went to graduate school with and has been a past guest on the Annex talking about discussing her work. But at Merced, it's a very racially and ethnically diverse campus, but it's a Hispanic serving institution. So I think I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but basically the predominant group of students of color, students other than white, are Hispanic or Latino,
Yeah.
right? And so, her writing about Black students on that campus is certainly different than thinking about being a Black student on a majority white campus. The other thing that I think was really helpful is distinguishing between like white dominance in terms of numerical and
Yeah.
whiteness as the dominant cultural frameworks, understandings, patterns of interaction, as you say, even though numerically speaking, white students aren't the most numerous population,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that they aren't participating and in a culture steeped in whiteness as a cultural framework, a set of practices, power relations, and
Yeah.
so forth.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just if I can jump in here, one of the things that makes me think about, I think about Dr. Pirtle's work. One of her pieces that I love is the beginning of the title is "I didn't know what anti-Blackness was until I got here," and then the following you find out, oh wait, this is at an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, so it just draws the reader in. So I mean, I think that piece is very powerful to illuminate how anti-Black racism works. And one of the things that I often share, and if I'm giving a talk, or I often I use that the screenshot of that text of Whitney's text and talk about the specificity of anti-Black racism. One of the it's kind of like a macabre joke, or not even a joke, but I often say, yeah, sure, like it's great to have, BIPOC is the term right now. It's
Hmm.
great to have like a, majority BIPOC, setting. However, if you are a non-Black person of color, you can still call me the N-word and I can still feel very hurt.
Right.
I know it's a crude way of thinking about anti-Black racism, but I think that really gets to the core of it, in some ways, of how we can understand the violent, how other groups, other people of color can also participate in and wield anti-Black racism. One of the things I found in my book as well, one student was reflecting upon her experience just in my interview with her, and she just kind of remembered. She was like, "Wait, now that I think about it, most of the racism I experienced was from Hispanic students." And I just
Mhm.
found that fascinating, right? I wasn't going into the to this research thinking that, but a lot of that has to do with proximity too, because she also hung out with a lot of the Latinx engineering students as well. But I'll stop there because I can just get on a roll and start talking. But yeah,
No, I think it's really fascinating, and it obviously has implications for some of the things that folks like you and people in sociology, other disciplines think through in terms of Bonilla Silva, right? And the sort of the changing racial kind of alliances almost you
yeah,
could think about, and what seems to be a kind of a tripartite like racial system that we're moving into. Okay, we could really geek out on this, and I love that stuff, and I read it, I think about it a lot. But I want to talk about what has happened in higher education since you published the research
yes,
for this
yeah,
book. And it was, as we said earlier, published in 2021. Maybe most notably, the Supreme Court in the United States ruled in a case called Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill. That case ended all consideration of race in college admissions, at least the race as specified by a tick box on a demographic form. So, what does your research suggest about the potential impact of this decision on the kinds of students you studied for your book? And before you answer, remembering that students at this university, I think you said Caldwell, 2% of students were Black. So if we're talking about, let's say West Side Story is a university that had practiced some kind of race-based affirmative action, and there are other kinds of affirmative action besides race-based, parenthetically, it doesn't seem like it was incredibly successful in recruiting a bunch of Black students. But anyway, what do you think about the impact of the Supreme Court decision?
yeah. I mean, what you said at the end really struck me, right? It's not they were doing a great job to begin with. Right, but we already have 2% Black students. What I find interesting, one of the things I find interesting, and thinking about the context of Caldwell, the School of Engineering, is that even when I went through the archives, I was looking, just trying to see what, if anything, was said about the School of Engineering at this school. And one of the things I found was that this school had its own engineering school magazine. And in 1968, I think shortly after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, the dean at this school penned a letter for the first time specifically about race. Like, there was nothing in this engineering school magazine that had been out since the 50s about race, really, specifically. And one of the things he said is that, like, there's simply just not enough Negroes for us to have a diverse environment. He didn't say that. He did say he did say Negroes, of course, given the time period. But he said there's just simply not enough Negroes, and that's just a sad fact, right? And I mentioned that because I was in 1968, and then when I interviewed folks who worked in enrollment, they would say the same thing. They want to call them Negroes, but God forbid. But they were saying, yeah, there just aren't enough Black students, who can meet the standards of this
Hmm.
school.
Hmm.
And they mentioned, yeah, the students that can do, there's so few of them. The students that can go to this side, West Side, they can also go to all these other elite institutions. So again, there's this scarcity mindset around Black students and enrollment at institutions like West Side University. Meanwhile, we know that historically Black colleges and universities produce the lion's share of Black engineering students. And I'm not a STEM major, but the math is not mathing here, right?
Hmm.
Something is going on. It's not a numbers thing. It must be something else, right? So it's a teaching thing or it's an enrollment thing. So if we're already not doing well with the standards that be, I do think this can be. I am very concerned about institutions like Westside that are already not doing right by enrolling enough Black students, because critical mass matters, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things I'm also worried about is this universities overcorrecting, if you will. And I see other scholars talking about it, overcorrecting, like a sarcastic sense, like, okay, I want to make sure that we don't get the ire of some conservative lawsuit that's talking about diversity or talking about enrollment. So we're going to make sure we are super race neutral, right? And people aren't even asking for this, but you know what? We have this Center for Engineering and Diversity. We're just going to defund that in general. We're going to open that up to everyone, and we're going to call it the Center for Engineering Success. And we want to make it open for everyone. So I'm also wondering how this, and we're seeing it in different cases as well, different institutions, how this ruling and others will lead to universities trying to get ahead of the curve, which means kind of go backwards and defund the limited supports that are for Black students, or limited strategies we have to support Black students and Black engineering students already. So I am very concerned about what this means for the numbers and experiences of Black students at predominantly historically white institutions.
We're definitely going to get to some specific examples of what's happening in the various United States.
Yeah.
But I want to go back for a second to how you conceptualize Black engineering students' experiences on campus as being embedded within and across a series of related social worlds, noting how some of these worlds were more and others less supportive of Black students. So what kinds of conceptual resources did you use in addition to social worlds to make sense of Black life on campus? And as a person who trained in basically the UCSF, Anselm Strauss, Social Worlds, Lee Star, Adele Clark, tradition, I think Social Worlds is awesome.
Yeah.
And so I was glad to see that you use that. But tell us more about your conceptual resources.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I'm not a sociologist by trade, right? By discipline. I trained in the education school. Sociology was my cognate or concentration. And
You're
so
in.
I
You're
arrived.
in, Antar. You're in. You're in.
I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
All right,
blessed.
I'm putting that on my
At least
CV.
in my book.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. This has nothing to do with anything, but back when I was looking for jobs, I think the sociology search committees would beg to differ, but that is okay. We're not talking about. I'm very happy at UCSB. But I remember I came upon the term social worlds, not in a class, but just me trying to read more work in general that felt right. I was like, okay, what are Black sociologists saying about Black life? I was really curious about that. So the first time I heard of the phrase social worlds was from E. Franklin Frazier, and one of the things he said about social worlds in Black life, Negro life, as he put it, right, was that the majority of Black folks' social experiences happens in a primarily Black social world. And I found so much inspiration in that. And that's not groundbreaking, but I was like, wait, I felt justification in what I was doing. I really wanted to center Black student life. So I drew upon E. Franklin Frazier's I like thinking about social worlds and Black life and where the action is happening, right? And one thing he also said is that, when we think about interracial contacts or a conflict between different races, that's takes up a very small amount of time in relation to the rest of their lives, which happens in a primarily Black world. So again, I was trying to say, like, this happens as well in the higher education space. So I found inspiration in that work, found inspiration in Black placemaking, the framework that was introduced by a group of Black sociologists, like Marcus Anthony Hunter, Mary Patillo, and a group other Zandria Robinson, a group of Black sociologists, Black placemaking. I found so much inspiration in that article in general, so much so I was like, you know what, all the higher ed needs to read this. I wrote an article about like how higher education scholars think about Black placemaking. So I'm very much indebted to their work and their thinking. And of course, I try to be a good student still. So I'm seeing who they're citing, and I see they're thinking very heavily with Zora Neale Hurston, right? So I was rereading Their Eyes Are Watching God, reading Zora Neale Hurston's essays, Art and Such, thinking about how Zora Neale Hurston constructed and understood Black life in relationship to other folks like W.E.B. Du Bois, right? So there was some tension there as well. She said, I think there's more to Black life than it being a sorrow song, right? And she loved being Black. So I was like, okay, how can I really center this life, this joy in my study. So anyway, I hearkened upon various sources, and I also was thinking with Pierre Bourdieu's work, and heavily thinking about his idea of field, namely Lucio, like what makes a social world, or what makes a community, an identifiable community or social world. What practices, what symbols, what signifies to someone else that they are an engineer, or they are in the engineering community. So I found I found inspiration in Bourdieu's work, also critical race theory more broadly, things specifically with racial realism in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And racial realism, of course, is the thesis or argument that racism is permanent as opposed to aberrant in society. And, not all critical race theorists agree in racial realism, but all critical race theorists agree that racism is enduring and is a structure of society. Whether it's permanent or not is up for debate. But so I'm drawing from a number of different scholars and thinkers for this. In my introduction, at least, I say that this is largely based upon critical race theory and Pierre Bourdieu's sociology. If I would write the book again, I probably would just really lean into critical race theory and Black sociology, honestly.
Mm-hmm. I also have a note here about the blues,
Yeah.
which actually seems to, I mean, I was just thinking about the connection between your use of the blues and what the blues represents, and I don't know what you call it, the ethos of the blues or the pathos of the blues, but in connection to some of the stuff, like if you look at Souls of Black Folk, right, there's always those bits of music that accompany the essays.
Yeah.
And of course, Du Bois had a running relationship with forms of artistic production. So it wasn't just sitting down writing like nonfiction essays or argumentative, essays in the Crisis or other places. Talk about the blues
Yeah, for
in your
sure.
book, if you would.
Yeah. My last chapter is called Sociology and the Blues of Campus Life. And, I was hesitant to make this a title. I was like, who am I to talk about the blues, right? I feel like, I don't know, that's for Du Bois. That's for the certified, Black scholars who can harken to the blues and jazz. But I remember when I initially was writing this book is based off my dissertation, and my advisor, Bill Tierney, completely indebted to him and his work. He read my dissertation and he said, some of it just feels sad. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? He's like, I don't know. There's just something kind of melancholy about, some of the students' experiences. And I didn't know what he was talking about. Like, because yes, I highlight instances of anti-Black racism, alienation, students feeling like they don't belong in some ways, but I didn't want it to come off like I did not want this book to be read as a sorrow song completely,
Mm-hmm.
So I was wrestling with my advisor's statement that it felt sad, or there's this kind of undertone of melancholia or something. And I found an answer in the blues. Like, okay, so why might someone read this and say like, oh, this is a sad story, And in part, of course, part of that had to do with my writing as well. But I thought about the blues as a concept or an idea to talk about facing or engaging with the realities of life, the structural oppression, yet not being defeated by the
Mm-hmm.
realities of life and structural oppression. So, yes, we acknowledge that anti-Black racism shapes so much of campus life. And yes, we also acknowledge that life must go on. And I really wanted to, and
Mm-hmm.
I think when I think about the blues, it's about that unyielding spirit. Because at the end of the day, we're singing about it. Yes, all these things are happening, but I'm going to make a song about it. I'm going to keep going, one foot in front of the others. And I found that inspiration in thinking about students because, in the same interview, a student was telling me, yes, I'm being alienated from groups so much so that I'm doing problem sets that are meant for groups by myself. And yes, I feel like, my professor is treating me differently because I'm a Black woman. And, these students, they were saying this, and sometimes, tears came, and sometimes they were just laughing about it, and they still kept going. So I did not want this to be like a defeatist book, or, I wanted it to be read as, yes, this is the reality. Yes, there's a blue tint to Black life on campus, but Black life is not overdetermined by anti-Black racism. These students are agentic. They resist,
Mm-hmm.
and they're able to
Mm-hmm.
name it while still not being defeated by it. And anyway, I wanted to highlight that was the real reason why I kind of got into that. And I thought the blues kind of signified that. Like, yes, it sounds sad, but it's also a testament to the spirit of
Mhm.
these students. So
These are words we don't typically say in sociology, but I'd almost characterize it as a love letter to the strength of Black students in the midst of, or as I think one scholar, last name Sharp, like in the wake,
yeah, Christina Sharp, I believe. Yeah,
Christina Sharp, that's right.
yeah,
Thank you. So a love letter to the strength and resilience of Black
yeah.
students, in the wake. So those of you who are listening and know what in the wake means from the interview with Torrin Monahan, and if you don't, go back and listen to it
That's it.
on the NX. It'll be in the NX feed. All right. Well, I want to go to the current situation. So in states like Texas, Florida, and just recently, Alabama, DEI offices and potentially other spaces like affinity spaces for Black and other marginalized student groups are being renamed. Some are being closed. I just saw a story today that students at the University of Texas are saying that the anti-DEI law has really significantly curtailed the ability of minority student groups to operate. Florida State University just fired all employees working in the DEI space. What did your research tell you about the importance of spaces for Black students specifically, as opposed to more, as you mentioned earlier, like multicultural centers or spaces that were for all students, or even more generally for minoritized students?
Spaces are so critical. I don't remember the quote exactly, but one of the directors of like the Center for Diversity and Engineering just straight up said it. This is the director of this office. She said if we didn't have Nesby, we probably wouldn't have any Black students here. And
Mm,
I mean, and again, I think quotes like this they uplift the work and amplify the significance of these spaces, but they're also an indictment upon institutions.
mm,
And students so often have to they power these spaces, they bring life to these spaces, right? And that's even with so mind you, I think that interplay is useful, right? So we have this director for like a center that's supposed to and does support Black students, yet she also understands that even with that, it's also the support of Black student groups that retention can happen. So even a
mm,
center by itself is not enough. It also takes these student peer groups or counter spaces to do some of that work. And even then, there's still work to be done. So I mentioned that to say, like, even universities that do have supports Black students and other students of color, it requires students and staff and administrators oftentimes to do work after hours just to make the feeling of inclusiveness happen. So if
mhm.
already what we have is not enough, what happens when we strip what we have away? And so that's a very long way of me saying I'm very concerned about what's going on. And I think we all need to be watching what's happening. And I mention this whenever I can. Yes, this is happening in Alabama and Texas, but it could just as easily start happening in California. This is all of our problems. So I'm keeping a close eye on it, and I'm very concerned because spaces are integral for these students. I mean, when I think about Nesby in particular, and Nesby's functioning, right? Like, yes, it was students who were working to make it happen, but I mean, the role that it played was instrumental. This is a very small example, but Nesby in the book, when the Nesby chapter I'm highlighting, they held a party once or twice a year. That party, the proceeds from that party would go to funding Nesby students, Black engineering students, to go to the National Society of Black Engineers engineering convention, right? That happened yearly. So that the cost of the money they got from that would kind of subsidize the cost for students, basically. And it was also a party. And also one of the things I found fascinating, it's talk with some of the students. They say, yeah, this is kind of like the only party I go to during the year. And you think
Mhm.
about college, what type of time is college, right? And Nesby is creating and so I say what type of time is college because, I was probably partying a little bit too much, right? But for engineering students who are, strapped for time, where do they party? Where do they have fun? And where do they find joy, even in the midst of all the problem sets, right? And we have Nesby meeting that need, right? For some students, the only party they attend is a party that's created by these groups. So I say this to say, if we have these laws and bills coming in and defunding organizations that are already not super supported by universities, it's just going to stress students even more. It's going to stress faculty, staff, and administrators who are allies and want to support these groups even more. And I really feel like in the coming years, I think people will continue to resist and challenge these rulers and find creative ways around them. But I do think there's going to be an out migration of sorts from a lot of these universities.
You may be right. We may be seeing a move like that already. I mean, not only in terms of the racial climate on campus or the climate of anti-Black racism on campus, but also issues related to gender, reproductive
Yes.
justice, those kinds of things. And I'm really glad you mentioned solidarity across, California and perhaps other so-called blue states versus ones that are, so-called red states, because in as much as we still do live in one United States, there can be policies at the federal level that supersede state level policies. And we don't only need to look at reproductive justice in that way, but there can also be Department of Education policies that might restrict state level or federal level funding for certain activities or penalize the use of maybe state funding or other kinds of funding for offices like these. So, it's one of those things where, like, on the one hand, you got to be at least as creative as the people who are trying to restrict access or restrict funding to these kinds of programs,
Yeah.
but at the same time, maybe try to be more proactive in not only defending, but being proactively promoting the
Yes.
effects and the benefits of these programs as well, and these offices and these groups, these student groups like the National Society for Black Engineers, NSBE, as you say. Okay, well, let's talk about NSBE. At Westside University, it was led primarily by Black women in a pretty pronounced gendered division of labor. So can you help us understand why the burden of representing Black and other minority groups on campus often falls to women? And I certainly think this relates to what you were talking about as Black engineers, as unpaid ambassadors, as retention agents, what you generally call racial equity labor. So maybe talk about both of those if you would.
Yeah, definitely. So and I'll probably share more than I should here. There was so I submitted out my book, and for the first time I submitted it out, and it wasn't, you think your book's going to be great, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm good. I don't need much revisions. I should be fine. And that's for me. That was both youth and naivete, right? And it was funny. Not funny, but both of the readers, or all the readers really, for the first draft of my book, came back and they're like, "Hey, we're liking what you're doing here, but gender matters. Have you heard of
Mm,
intersectionality?" And I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like, I felt terrible. Like, of course, I took gender studies courses, da 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 da, but that was a big limitation in how I was
mm,
initially analyzing the work. Like, I was very much thinking race, 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 but gender really mattered. And I had a very clumsy question to think about gender, even, right? My question was like, hey, how does gender matter? Right. And that's not enough. Right. So all of
mm,
this to say, I ended up, so I had to reevaluate and I did kind of reanalyze my data. And then I was like, oh, wait, I didn't even notice this. It was, and again, my limitation there, my thinking, me being a cis Black man probably has a lot to do with that too.
mm,
I didn't notice the gender divide in that it was primarily Black women leading it. There were the Black men who attended the meetings, but it was Black women leading it. And that was just kind of a matter of course. No one really said anything about it. When I asked Black engineering students about how gender mattered, it was, that a lot of them struggle to answer that question. Part of that's on me for asking a question that way, admittedly,
mm.
right? It's a clumsy question as a
We've
qualitative
all been
researcher.
there. All of us, all the ethnographers, interview analysts, and interview researchers, we've all been there.
Very clumsy question, admittedly, right? But yeah, so I mean, it was very prominent. I mean, even the reactivation of NSBE, one of the points I make is that these spaces that are so central to Black student life on campus are not, they don't just exist. They are made and remade and have to be reactivated at times too. So the person who reactivated NSBE was a Black woman as well, because she wanted to do this work for the good of the Black community at this school. So although I think students, or at least in their answers, weren't identifying the additional labor or tax that Black women played in leading these organizations, it was very, very prominent, And I think about how that burden of leading and participating in these groups it just seems as a matter of course. It's just something you do, you know. So it's not even, you know, I think some of the students don't even notice that, hey, this is labor, or, you know, as you know, think about racialized equity labor, as Lerma and colleagues call it, right? That like that's not something that they would identify. It's just, wait, this is what you do for the good of the community, for the culture, as the phrase was during the time. A lot of students would say, you just do it for the culture. So that idea that Black students will come together, thinking about linked fate, right? The linked fate of
Mhm.
Black students on campus. Well, of course, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of time if it's for the good of the community. So that's one way I think universities play upon, you know, Black students' conceptions of linked fate, right?
That's really good. I mean, in the book, you talk about how Black engineers act as unpaid ambassadors for the university. They are often made responsible for recruiting more Black students and actually blamed when they don't appear at events where maybe prospective students are or future, even younger students are on campus for various reasons. And that is part of this racial equity labor. And that concept, I think, helps us understand one mechanism that makes the presence of Black people, Black students on campus, particularly so helpful to white students, which is what sociologist Natasha Weraku, if I have that pronunciation correct, maybe not, calls the diversity bargain. So to me, it's one more example of how the presence of Black students, I mean, sure, that supports other Black students for the culture, as you say, but it's often a selling point for non-Black students and for white students particularly, in the sense that those white students are told, well, it's good to have Black students here and other students of color, non-Black students of color here, because you're going to be managing people, you're going to be working with diverse teams.
You have to learn how to work with diverse others, right? You have to learn how to work across race. And totally, like, students benefit from that. Universities benefit from it, right? Like, I don't know, like, as I mean, the times are changing so quickly. But, you know, if you want to go to a campus and something, regardless of what your racial background is, you want to see diversity. You want to experience other people, people from different backgrounds, right? That's
Mhm,
only going to
mhm.
happen if they're at the school, and if they are retained, right? And if you have people who can come in with a week's notice to a panel talking about the experience of engineers, right? And you also have parents who want their students to go to, want their kids to go to schools where they're going to learn how to, well, hopefully have friends outside of their race, have a diverse friend group, right? So this stuff doesn't merely just exist, right? We need people to retain like the folks from these marginalized backgrounds, right? And it's often the students who are doing the retaining themselves. So there is labor that goes into that, and there's labor that goes into and even thinking about the diversity bargain in particular, right? Just wanting these interactions with other people. Oftentimes, there are, you know, in any type of interaction, if I don't know someone, right? I do want to make that clear. If you don't know someone and there's difference there, there's always the threat or possibility of offending someone, right?
Mhm.
And it becomes even more heightened, of course, when you think about specific racial, gender, identities, et cetera, right? So in order, and I talk about this later in different aspects of the chapter, but if I'm going to be, how do I say it? There are, when I was a student, and I'll say this at least, when I was a student at Brown University, PWI was 6% Black students at the time. I would just get tired of trying to of dealing with microaggressions from a lot of white students. And I was, you know, they meant well, totally. But I was like, bro, stop asking me if I'm on the track team. Like, I told you that already. How many times are you going to confuse me with the other Black person, right? So I could have patience in that interaction, right? And it got to a point where I was like, yeah, this is a little too much work. And, you know, my friend group was primarily Black when I think about my time at Brown. And one of the things I noticed and actually appreciated was at this school, you had students really exercising a lot of patience with people who were different like them from different racial backgrounds. So I think, yes, you know, in order for diversity to happen, it often requires grace from the person who has more marginalized identities or from a marginalized position. So there's labor and grace, and yeah, and grace with that, just to make that bargain or make this diversity happen.
I kind of see it. There's like two sides to this. On the one hand, there's almost like from the perspective of institutions, PWI, historically white institutions, and the PWI is like almost treating Black students as I mean, we talk about tokenism, but really kind of like consuming the presence of Blackness as like a status marker or as a recruitment tool for other students, non-Black students, white and other non-Black students of color, but at the same time, like relying on and consuming their labor. So it's like double consumption. So on the one hand, like consuming Blackness in the sense of like, look how culturally diverse we are. And on the other hand, consuming labor to say to those same students who you've just made a part of your marketing and tool marketing campaign, and you're responsible for keeping this going, which obviously is extremely unfair to those students, particularly when we're talking about 2%, 3%, right? Because there's just not that many to go around.
No, I love the fact you called it consumption because that's really what it is. It's the university consuming, eating, profiting from this labor, right? It really is exploitation in a number of ways, right? Just the existence of the students and also the labor of the students. And yeah, like, and I was really heartened in the book when I learned that you did have administrators advocating for Black students, saying, "Hey, this isn't cool. You can't just profit off of these students coming in, and like you can't expect them to come to these enrollment fairs all the time. You know, you can't, that can't be in their obligation." So you did have administrators doing that, but you also had administrators kind of pressuring them. And you also had Black students putting that pressure on
Mhm.
themselves too. And the university benefits, right? And I think that's where the concepts, Lerner Hamilton and Nielsen's concept of racialized equity labor really comes in, where we can see that universities profit off of this labor and, you know, just and give nothing back really. It's almost kind of like, well, you should just be happy you're here. We're happy that there are more Black students here. So it's a really kind of sick cycle, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. As if, the presence of Black students at Caldwell and West Side more broadly is like a gift to those Black students,
Yeah.
as opposed to West Side University and Caldwell, more particularly in the case of the students you studied, actually benefiting and like much more than just like maybe the tuition those students pay or the contributions they
Hmm.
make to the classroom, but all of this additional work that happens, uncompensated work. Okay, so I want to talk about the fact that because there are such few Black students on campus and in Caldwell specifically,
Hmm.
you argue that Black students collectively are invisible or become invisible, or maybe made invisible is a better way to say it. But individually, they're hyper visible because there are only one or two Black students in each classroom, so they stand out. Collectively, their specific needs get overwhelmed in what you call diversity dilution. And I've seen this happen at more than one institution where a leader, whether that's a upper administration person, let's not mention any particular names, but upper administration person says we are X% diverse, right? And that, of course, masks a lot that's going on in that number.
Yeah.
So can you speak to how those processes work?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like you said, just to kind of echo or add to what you were saying about X% diverse, right? And I hope universities get better about this. But I mean, it was ridiculous, but great data to kind of prove the point, right? I saw it. I was like, this is terrible. Yeah, this is going to go in this theme, right? So one of the things I thought about was like in marketing materials for Caldwell, they said, oh yeah, in our incoming class, we have 22% Latinx, Pacific Islander, Native American, and Black, right? That's it, 20% and then all these groups after it. So I'm like, whoa, whoa, wait, can we break down the 20%, please?
Mhm.
And when you actually look at that, you see that Black students made up, I think it was probably less than 2% of the incoming class. But that's a bad number. So we can just collapse it all into it, right? Which I think universities do in a lot of ways. That's one example thinking about numbers, but it also happens in programming. What is for diverse students or what is for students of color does not mean for Black students, right? And I think this can go for, various races too. I think we need to have intentionality with our programming. And if we're trying to meet the needs of one group, in particular Black engineering students, right? How can we be racially and culturally responsive? Being racially and culturally responsive does not mean, okay, we're also going to open this up to everyone because it's less specific. That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, but it's like you're kind of defeating the purpose of giving this targeted support for a group. So yeah, you see that in programming, in that events that were supposed to be for Black students or get opened up for the wider community, and in so doing, Black students become invisible or afterthoughts even. And we see that too in the just numbers. Where are they? Right? The what one administrator was like, I don't see Black students. I don't see them around. Like, where are they? So just the
They're studying.
invisibility. Yeah, right. They're studying, right? Or is this one person kind of in and out of the Center for Engineering Diversity, just popping in, right? But without that critical mass, it's easy to be like, oh wait, I don't see them, right? And then there's hyper visibility in the classroom. Oftentimes, when I was studying this school, a lot of students were maybe like 50%, I forget, over 50% were the only Black person in their major for their year. So you stick out like a sore thumb, right? However, within that hyper visibility, some students kind of demonstrated or talks about invisibility. Like there was a invisibility folks not acknowledging their existence. So is this weird tension there or contradiction there? Yes, I'm the only Black person in this class, and yes, I'm still not being treated as if I'm here. I'm not being acknowledged by some of my peers. So that was an interesting kind of contradiction that I think a lot of students have to deal with in the engineering space.
I think one of the things I remember from your book on this theme is that when you have these classrooms that are, on the face of them, racially and ethnically diverse, so you have some students from Asian and Pacific Island nations, you have some students that are Latinx, you have some white students, you have some perhaps other kinds of international students from various regions of the world. And it's very easy for those groups, because there's more than one in each of those, we're talking like 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, to make study groups that persist. And for a long time in sociology and other disciplines, we've seen how those racial and ethnic groups cohere, like across lots of contexts. Education is one, not the only, obviously. But if you are the only Black student, then, it's kind of like, me in elementary school kickball, it's the last person chosen,
Yeah.
or left out, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that there's sort of no sort of automatic or default kind of affinity group within those classes on the lines of race, ethnicity,
Yeah.
and nationality.
Completely. I mean, there was this one, I did an interview with one faculty member in engineering, and it was interesting because I asked him, I was like, I forgot the question I asked, but I think it was about working in groups, right? And he's like, yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. Like part of being an engineer is being able to work in groups. And I was like, do you think it's harder for Black students? And he was like, I mean, he didn't, I don't think he gave a definitive answer. But one thing he did say was that it happens all the time in this class. He said Latino students with the Latinos, the white students with the white students, the Black students with the Black students. And I'm like, yeah, sure. But there's only one Black student in that class. What does that mean? Right. And so there was this disconnect even with the faculty. They're, like, how is that possible? Right. But anyway, yeah, I thought the aspect of kind of collaboration, that was something I was, me being not being an engineer, I didn't understand how important collaboration was for problem sets, et cetera, right? Or just projects. And that was probably one of the things that surprised me the most. I was like, oh, wait, Black students' not inability, but Black students' alienation in these classes, or non-Black others' inability or aversion to work or antagonism towards Black students is affecting Black students' access to working groups, better grades, collaboration, etc. Right? You see the reproduction of anti-Black racism. Like, oh, this is normal, right? We can ice out this person. So that happens in class. It's not checked by professors. Professors say they want to do a group project and think they're, oh yeah, I really ate with that group project. Let's go. I'm creative. But there's no scaffolding there. So you have students left to, who may not know, like me giving students, non-Black students benefit of the doubt, who may not have worked with other students of other races before, right? But anyway, I think it becomes, it can reproduce itself. So if people are used to icing out specific types of people in the classroom, that also happens in the lab. that also happens when you get that job, that tech
Mm.
job or whatever, that Google job, that Meta job, right? It becomes normal, right? Like, oh, wait, I have to work with this person. So there's almost like a fiction that, at least at this school, there is a fiction that students just learn how to work together. No, like, there was a lot of strife that went into that, so much so that Black students often did group projects by themselves. And again, that was something I was thrown about, right? I was just thrown. Besides, yeah, I think that's one of the big things I think about just having critical mass. It can help in just belonging. Yeah, having someone to work with, study with, etc., without any type of potential anti-Black racism happening. But I do, I mean, to your point, definitely agree that, we see these groups forming often along the lines of racial identity and gendered identity as well. So if that alienation or lack of belonging based on identity definitely comes to fore in the classroom.
I mean, in the absence of a critical mass, you might think about how you, me, other people listening could think about how to structure groups in ways that actually ensure that there is a diverse mix of identity categories and folks in those groups, so that what ends up happening is that resources that certain groups have more access to are more widely shared. Because what we're talking about here is groups that have access to like study files, they have access to test files, they have access to past problem sets. And what this does is speed the process of their finishing projects. I'm not going to say it necessarily increases it or enhances their learning, but potentially shortens the time that they spend studying and gives them consequently more time for other kinds of things that we could think
100%.
about as like ingredient to like traditional college life, or the kinds of recreation and restoration
Yeah.
activities that quite frankly white cisgender male fraternity members tend to have,
Yeah.
and others don't. And not that's not even to mention like unauthorized help and cheating,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
which actually could juice your GPA, could
Yes.
juice your grades,
Yes.
and give you access to higher paying jobs, or
Hmm.
higher status entry level work,
Yeah.
and set you up for the management track, so to speak, even though you're competing against people who did the project entirely by themselves, or
Yes.
the problem set entirely by
Yeah.
themselves. So you've tapped into a mechanism of the reproduction of racialized like inequality in various engineering fields,
Yeah.
and you'll read the book and figure this out. But that is ultimately pretty much the opposite of what we might kind of want if we think we're living in a system that rewards so-called
Oh,
merit,
for sure.
whatever
Yeah,
that
for
means.
sure. I mean, I wrote there's one student in particular I'm thinking of. I don't remember her name in the books. I'm not going to say it. I remember her name in real life, but she was talking about how it was like for her to do work by herself on an exam by herself, right? That was supposed to be done by herself, and how other people, I mean, and she wouldn't do as well as some of her classmates who were cheating, who were working together on the exam, like just straight up, right? And she's like, but the professor doesn't see that. The professor
Mhm.
sees that I'm the Black girl with a B or whatever. And the professor doesn't see like, okay, yeah, this white, and then for another student, the professor just sees, oh yeah, this white girl got an A, but she cheated, right? My B with integrity doesn't mean anything to an A that came with cheating. Professors don't know that. The
Yeah.
grades are great at the
Yeah.
end of the day. And so, yeah, the whole idea of meritocracy, I mean, we know it's flawed in general, but it really gets, I think, blown up when we think about academic integrity. And this is, I mean, I wrote a little op-ed about this finding. I said that academic integrity is racialized. That actually led to the most trolling and hate mail I ever got, because one of those,
Mm.
conservative sites picked it up and they said that I was saying that, oh yeah, Black people should be able to cheat or something. When in reality, I was highlighting the fact that no, a lot of white people have access to these test banks because they're part of historically white fraternities and sororities, or they're part of these engineering societies, right? That also have test banks. And of course, it's just a bad faith reading of my work. But I think even now, when we think about this plagiarism stuff that's happening, we are seeing how academic integrity is racialized. We are only looking at Black scholars to say, like, oh, there are a
Mhm.
couple words that are similar here. Not even, I mean, even the fact that, I'm getting off topic here, but even the fact that people are taking these plagiarism things seriously, is maddening to me. Why are universities even listening to these people? But again, we see how academic integrity is being racialized and it being a vehicle of anti-black racism. Very clearly, it starts early, but we have to say like, hey, it's racialized, and let's be real. Students have access to various types of academic resources that will shape their social lives, and as you mentioned, potentially their trajectory post grad as well.
I mean, I think there's a connection here with the fact that this student you're talking about, they earn a B on this exam, but also most likely they're the only Black student in that class. And so what you have, maybe you think about this over time and over the years, are a series of Black students who are the only one in their class. They're working by themselves to complete problem sets and exams that either other people are getting unauthorized assistance for, or they're completing with other people and they're cutting their time down by like, 75% or so. And then if you're the professor, what you see over time is a pattern of Black students, potentially anyway, underperforming relative to other students who get these kinds of supports.
Totally.
And so doesn't that, and I think this relates to something you document in your book, doesn't that those kinds of processes, they actually have implications for the kinds of students or which students faculty choose to bring onto their projects? Who gets to be the research assistant in their second year or their third year? Who gets to be a co-author on that paper
Yep.
that was done, out of research in a lab?
Yeah.
Who gets that letter of recommendation to go from Westside University to perhaps a more prestigious, PhD program in engineering?
Totally. Yeah.
So all of this is what's so great about ethnography is that, we ethnographers, you, me, are trying to uncover some of these processes that lead to the things that other folks document in more quantitative, associational kinds of ways.
No, for sure. And I mean, and just I won't be long about this, but yeah, like that's really it. It has outcome. It has real outcomes, real results. Because what do professors see? They see that grade. That leads to what else? It leads to more interest in the student. Oh, this student's a high flyer. But they don't know that that student is also cheating. They don't know that 90% of the kids in the class are cheating. That was the biggest finding one of the things I was like, oh, whoa, I didn't know it was like this. Students are cheating like that. What? But Black students literally didn't even have access to cheating.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't even have access to that. So it really wasn't a level playing field. The playing field. They were working twice as hard just to do the same thing that other folks are doing, cheating to get similar grades. So it was fascinating to me. But realistically, how would a professor know that? Not to give professors too much grace there. The professor should be meeting with all students, regardless of race, and showing interest there. But as a professor, are you assuming that all your students are cheating? And which students have test banks and which students don't? Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about this. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a little while ago your experience at Brown and being asked over and over again if you were on the track team, which is an experience that I understand many Black students have at historically white and predominantly white institutions. But on pages 240 and 241 of your book, you profile several Black students and talk about how they deal with interpersonal racism. So you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but many of these students address comments from other students, non-Black students, in really respectful and generous ways, far from the outrage that many might expect in what's been called cancel culture or campus outrage culture. TM, you heard it here. Can you describe one or two of these instances and how the Black student handled it? Because I really think this is how Black students make campus diversity happen, which is kind of smooth these incidents for white students, primarily, but perhaps not exclusively.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm thinking of right now, forgot to see his name in the book, but I was asking him, like he mentioned that sometimes he would see people, non-Black people, who wouldn't say hi to him as he walks, like people that he knew from his classes. And I think about, for me, I'm like, okay, bet. I'm never saying hi to you again either. Okay, you act like you don't know me. Like that's just me. But I was very heartened, actually, and surprised to see he's like, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And those are his words. Try to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like maybe they're just having a bad day, or maybe they didn't see me. So just giving that person that more grace, giving them the benefit of the doubt. And then he says, like, but if that keeps happening, then I know who they are. That's patience, that grace there, or taking the time to explain to people, non-Black people, hey, you probably shouldn't say this word and here's why, right? So there was that. It wasn't like, what you see on Twitter oftentimes, I'm not going to explain to you, that's not my duty, you need to just Google, right? No, you have a lot of Black students who are saying, no, let me explain to you why you copying the lyrics to a rap song and including the N-word in your tweet or Facebook status isn't okay, So there was patience there. There was a willingness to like, okay, let me get you up to speed so you can be a little more critically aware and, in your dealings with other people. So, I mean, and that's work too, right? Of course, there's work and there's labor and there's time and intentionality that's necessary in any relationship to get to know someone who has a different background. But yeah, like I said, I think these Black engineering students were more willing to and kind of accepted the fact like, well, a lot of these people are like grew up maybe racist. So, I have to, kind of understand that. And if I want to have interactions with them, I have to be willing to work with them. I have to be patient with them. So there was this element of grace that I was really surprised by. And like you said, like really counters a lot of this outrage culture, this fact that like, oh no, we're canceling them, da 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 da. I mean, I remember even, and I described this in the text as well, there was an involvement fair at the university where, different groups, student groups would be in the middle of campus and kind of advertise their group, right, for incoming students. And there was one group, primarily Asian American students, and it was like some dance group, basically. So they're out there, with everyone else, all the other groups, and they're playing music and doing dance routines every so often, trying to get people to come to their table. And, they're playing a lot of hip hop music. A lot of this music was not edited. So you had this group with no Black people dancing to music that was kind of blaring the N-word. And I'm looking at it and I'm just like, couldn't they have picked like like an edited song for this? I don't know, right? But when I asked students, like I was taken aback. I was like, yo, y'all not even thinking about it like an edited song? That's wild. But when I asked students how they were feeling about it, all of them were like, I mean, it's in the song, all right? Or like, I mean, if I just have to assume that, even if they are saying in their head, right? Like they're not saying it out loud. And if they are like, that can't stop me from enjoying the music, So again, think about the blues, right? The fact that, okay, there is this assumption that, yeah, they might be saying in their head, but does that mean I shouldn't dance to the music too? So I don't know, there was a grace there. There was a maturity there. There was, I don't know, like just a really, I think, nuanced understanding of racial realities that I appreciated from students. Some students even said, like, and this is maybe a knock going. Some of the engineering students would say that they didn't have time to worry about racism. They didn't have time to worry about microaggressions, even though it was a thing. It wasn't denying the existence that they had to deal with racial and gendered microaggressions. However, work had to be done, so they would think about very intentionally where are they going to expend their efforts, right? So again, you have a complete counter narrative, this idea that students are snowflakes, right? This is the furthest thing. I think, especially when you're thinking about Black engineering students.
I wonder, and I was just thinking about this as you're talking about these Black students and their engagement with white students or other non-Black students who might use the N-word or might, repeatedly ask them if they're a member of the track team or whatever. I mean, part of the potential benefit of addressing that, I wonder if this is in their minds at all, is that if I educate this person, then they're not going to do this to future Black people, And so like this is like for the culture, right? So I'm doing this so that I'm saving the next, X number of Black people that this like underinformed person I'm encountering now.
Yeah.
And, that's not, obviously that's not work on the like, institutional and structural racism level. And that's not going to get, a Black engineering student to leapfrog over, somebody else maybe for jobs or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is a thing that a student can contribute.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, I think a specific example, right? There was a study group happening. I won't get too deep into it. It's in the book, but there's a study group going on with NSBE, Black engineering students, and a few other students who are non-Black, South Asian men, and I think two white students asked if they could join the room that NSBE had reserved. So they're like, yeah, sure. And it's around finals time. So everyone's studying. It's kind of late at this point. People are goofing off. The other group of non-black students, they're like laughing, getting a little rowdy, not in a bad way, just like laughing. And I think they were kind of playing some music, and the other side wasn't disruptive, but we were curious, like, oh, what's so funny over there? So one of the black engineering students at undergrad walked over there, and they showed him lyrics to a song that they were making. It was like they were making a rap song about something that had to do with computer science or something. I don't know, like it was engineers, right? So, but they're making a rap song using like kind of lyrics from some popular song, but in inputting computer science phrases within it or whatever. Now, the rap song that they were kind of subbing the computer science lyrics for had the N word throughout it, right? And the student, the Nesby student, the black guy who walked over there was like, oh man, this is cool. That's so funny. He was like, but you're going to take out the N word, right? And the South Asian student is like, oh yeah, of course, bro, of course. Would he have done it? I don't know. but it was in that one small
Yeah.
moment, the way he handled that moment, right? And he kind of checked them, gently. And then he
Mhm.
said, wait, put on the instrumental for that song, right? So he asked him to put on just the music, and he just went out and started trying to do his own off the top of the dome freestyle about computer science in general, like just to kind of diffuse the situation. And everyone's hyping
Right.
him up. But it was that like a skillful choreography, if you will, of making sure that
Mhm.
stops in the moment while also making sure everyone still felt like it was a relaxed atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
anyone who's led a classroom or managed any type of conversation across difference and conflict, that's tough to do. And here he was doing it at 11 p.m. while studying for some type of exam, senior in college. So it was a lot. There are moments like that I think the acrobatics that I think some students, black folks, have to do to kind of make the situation feel smooth out situations while also correcting other folks, I was really fascinated by.
I'm glad you use the term acrobatics because it does imply a set of like practiced skills developed over time. I mean, I was thinking about the term repair, but not repair in terms of like two people, interpersonal repair, but like, social repair in that kind of group context. And that happens a lot when people get together. There's something that happens, and the whole group has to find a way to either address it or find a way through it or past it. And there's some work that has to be done to make that movement possible. All right, well, I think I want to transition now to talk about the chapter on CRT and higher education that you published. I think on Twitter, you said this is one of the things that you had been working on intensively for a while, and it's a pretty lengthy chapter, I must say. I read it with a lot of interest. For those of us who don't study higher education as scholars, what could you tell us about the impact of CRT as a legal analytic tradition on higher education as an institution?
So number one, I appreciate you for reading that piece. Oh my gosh, past Antar thought it was a great idea to sign up to write this chapter, and the editor's like, all right, it's 70 to 80 pages, double space. You still, oh yeah, totally, totally. But yeah, thank you for getting through it. I hope it wasn't too boring to
Oh no,
read.
it was a very engaging and enlightening read, but I remember you tweeting about it and I was like, okay, he put this effort into it,
Yeah,
and I like reading about CRT. I have a, master's degree in the study of higher education,
yeah,
and I'm curious about, higher ed as an institution, as
yeah,
someone who's a department chair and other things. And I was like, I'm gonna read this not just because I knew you were gonna come on or wanted to have you
yeah.
on, but just because I was like, no, this is important for me.
No, I really appreciate that for real. So often we write stuff and we wonder who reads it or wonder if anyone reads it. So thank you. And yeah, I mean, as far as to get back to your question, so critical race theory, legal analytic, I won't get too deep into it, came about in the late 80s. And legal analytic, I mean, it's a legal theory, came about in the law, and it has since spread to various fields. Education, it came to education through Gloria Ladson Billings and William Tate IV. They wrote a paper toward critical race theory in education, I believe in 95, 96, 95, published in Teachers College Record. So education as a field was probably a little bit ahead of the curve as far as thinking with critical race theory. And that's because of the work of Gloria Ladson Billings and William Tate IV, right? And they were at Wisconsin-Madison at the time of writing it, and I believe like that there was a lot of critical race legal scholars there too. So there was that proximity to to this burgeoning framework that I think also aided in their paper coming out. Or aided in the development of their paper. But anyway, so think about education. Yeah, it came out about the 95. It started to get developed more. In higher education, I believe it was a little slower on the uptake of thinking with critical race theory as a specific analytic, as a specific theory, and also just thinking about how we talk about race and racism in higher education, right? Higher education research, I think, is a little slower in talking about race and racism too. You think about the work of Sean Harper, who has that piece, "Racism Without Racist," I believe, or Race Without Racism," I believe, is a piece. And he thinks with Eduardo Bonilla Silva to analyze higher education research. And one of the things he found was that, I mean, it's a very important piece. One of the things he found was like in a lot of higher education research, he did a critical literature review. We talk about race without talking about racism, right? And Harper said that, folks who are using critical race theory, however, are talking about racism as well. So I think because of the work of folks like Sean Harper, Lloyd Patton Davis, obviously Danny Solorzano, UCLA, critical race theory has become more popular in higher education research. And with my text, my chapter, I'm loving the popularity, right? And it's become even more popular with this disinformation campaign about critical race theory. I'm loving the popularity. And I also want to really push or nudge folks to read the foundational research. The first critical race theory, you should not stop your study of critical race theory research in education. It has to go back to the legal field. That's the argument I'm making. If we want to call ourselves critical race theorists, if we want to leverage critical race theory analysis, our analyses will be better when we harken back to the legal field, because that's the foundation of it. So I'm trying to, like, in this piece, acknowledge the popularity and power of CRT while also nudging other scholars, higher education scholars. Yes, we can do this, and we have to make sure that we're paying, like, I don't know, like doing like theoretical justice to its roots. Gloria Ladson-Billings, for example, said that there's a steep learning curve to doing CRT. Why is that? And it's because I think she was really reading the work in the legal field, right? So I'm just trying to push scholars in this piece to really embrace that learning curve and take that walk up that curve, if you will, because our critical race work will be better.
I wonder if some folks in sociology might see a similar pattern as some concepts, and kind of this is going to sound pejorative, and maybe it is, the listicle version. Let's list out the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever it is, tenets, and then let's immediately go and apply them in my discipline, whether that's, and we can call it sociology for this. By the way, there's some very good people in sociology, some of whom have been on the Annex more than once, talking about their work in CRT. Victor Ray obviously is one of the major ones. So, Victor, we're not talking about you, but you could imagine at least the temptation to take that list and then say, how does this apply in my field side, or how does these concepts might apply in my institution that I study. And this is not to say that application is necessarily, a bad thing or not worthwhile as a project.
Yes.
Right. But it is to say that I think what your argument entails is just to say, if you've only read that list, maybe if you've only read like one or two things, like the introductory book by Delgado and Stefanczyk, for example, for example. That may be like looking a little deeper into this tradition and reading some of the folks who are early, obviously Crenshaw, obviously Derek Bell, Matsuda. I mean, a bunch of folks. I'm not even mentioning Plummer, I think. Like, I'm not even like mentioning all of them, right? Would be worth your while, in the same way that reading the Philadelphia Negro and Black Reconstruction are also really good things to do in 2024.
Yes. I mean, that's it, right? And I mean, I'm gonna put this out there. I'm going to cite you, but I love that you said listicle. It's like the listicle version. Like that's really it. Like it's I mean, because I have nothing against talking about CRT in terms of tenets, right? Daniel Solorzano put forth 5 tenets for CRT in education. In putting forth those five tenets, he also listed 18 unique legal, like CRT legal articles, right? 18 for those five tenets. This was also
Mhm.
during a time period pre-Google Scholar, right?
Mm.
Pre Firefox, Chrome. So he was literally, and I talk about this in the chapter, right? He was in the stacks. He was messing with card catalogs, microfilms. I don't even know what a microfilm is, right? So I think of the work he had to do to really like comprehend it, right? I wasn't doing a lot of that work at first. So a lot of this is even me calling my like me kind of talking to myself in the past, if you
Yeah.
will, right? And I think other
Yeah.
scholars kind of do this too. But it's so easy to be like, okay, this person has already distilled the tenets. Let me just or propositions. Let me just use these propositions and apply it, right? And so the
Mhm.
tenets or propositions by themselves aren't an issue. It's just that we cannot think that that is the substance of the theory itself, right? And I'm
Right.
trying to really, like, to your point, I'm just trying to urge people, hey, you have to read the actual stuff, You can't just say, okay, this is how X person thinks about this theory. You have to read it yourself, right? So Gloria Ladson Billings says that one thing she sees now is this, she calls it tenet du jour, right? Like it's just a whole bunch of listing of tenets, but like where's the actual engagement with the theory? So in me writing this piece, I'm really trying to, yeah, just urge people, hey, we got to do the reading. We have to do this foundational reading. It's not enough to read these secondary texts in our fields. And I mean, I don't mean secondary in like a slight, right? But it's like, okay, I
Yeah.
mean, primary, these are the legal foundational pieces. And there's the secondary pieces that come forth in our fields of sociology, education, etc. Still very important, but not the primary text.
I want to say, for those who haven't read the chapter, Antar does a really good job of being generous to people who maybe haven't done that digging into the what we're calling the primary or the sort of the originary
Yeah.
sources. So there's quite a bit of really generous, I said that again, but really generous framing of this
Mm.
call for engagement with the foundational text in CRT. And I think, it's very easy to, because many of us have been trained in like very critical traditions, and you go to graduate school and the first thing you do is try to, like, often anyway, our training is focused on being extremely critical of
Yes.
even very,
Yes.
very well established scholars and very, very good arguments. I mean, most of the time, my professors in graduate school weren't about giving me the worst argument ever. They wanted to give me the best arguments ever, and the best data and the best methods and things like that. So it's generative, I think, to do it in the way that you do in that chapter.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Well, listen, let's have some. This has all been fun, but now let's talk about banter stuff, because
I love it. I love it.
we've been bouncing back and forth some ideas, and
Mm.
we have a little tradition on the annex, I guess, as I'm developing it, talking to people, talking about guilty pleasure TV, which I'm happy to
Yeah.
talk about, but also maybe recent experiences like involving travel and food. I just returned from San Diego from the Pacific Sociological Association annual meeting, and we were staying in Mission Valley, which is a whole different side of San Diego than the beachy side.
Yeah.
We'll be in New Orleans for the Southern Sociological Society next week, and I am looking forward to some New Orleans fare. And restaurants there are supposed to be some of the best, sort of in the
Oh,
in the South.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, if not in the country. So I'm looking forward to that. Well, listen, Antar, if I visit Santa Barbara, which I visited before, as I was saying off mic, I have some friends who have a boat, not a yacht, Antar. I don't have
Yeah.
yacht friends. I'm
Yacht friends.
open.
I love it. I love
I'm
it.
open to yacht friends. I'm not afraid of having
Yeah.
someone sponsor me for a week in Santa Barbara, looking at the dolphins and the seals and stuff. But anyway, if I were to visit Santa Barbara, what's the Santa Barbara food? I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, and I'll be honest here. It's something I haven't experienced enough yet.
You're working hard.
I it's, so I commute. I commute from Ventura. So I'm like 40
Ah,
minutes so out.
okay,
Yeah, yeah,
fair
yeah. So I
enough.
can say more about Ventura, but there's this place. I mean, fantastic Mexican food. There's this place, Corazon Comedor. Incredible food. Oh my God. There's another place. Like, I'm gonna have to look it up. But do you like octopus?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's the pulpo at this place. I mean, it tastes almost like steak. I'm like, oh my God. Like I'll get the name and send it to you. But like, yeah, the Mexican food, seafood, incredible. It's incredible. I will say the one thing there's a deficit of is just the soul food. I knew that moving to Ventura, Santa Barbara area. I knew that was
You don't
I knew there
say.
wasn't going to be that much of that. Yeah, it wasn't too much of a surprise, you know. But yeah, there aren't. I mean, actually, there's a place called Lure, and it's kind of a chain. Lure Seafood. There's one close to me, and they have a decent shrimp and grits. I was like,
Mm,
okay, we're doing something. I love shrimp and grits, but yeah,
yeah,
Lure
same.
has really good shrimp and grits. There's also like some places that have well, like Cajun food allegedly, but the seasoning is leaves much to be desired. But but yeah, the
Fair enough.
you know, the seafood though, incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking forward to some fish tacos in San Diego, and
Oh man, yeah.
I didn't happen to get any, but next time
Yeah.
for sure. Well, what about guilty pleasure television shows? Antar, you got any you want to cop to here at on the
So
NX?
that's a great question because I'm not guilty about anything I
Oh,
watch,
good.
honestly. Like, I mean, and I'm loud and proud about the anime that I watch. I watch anime unapologetically, you know, like, and I tell folks sometimes when I get talks or whatever, like, hey, here's my Twitter or X, whatever. And I'm like, wait, I don't even know if I should give this to you because all I do is tweet about anime. You know, like that's it. I'm waiting for the new drops. But yeah, I don't know much about Love is Blind, but I can tell you a lot about what just happened on this anime solo leveling, right? Like I'm not watching that. I'm watching cartoons, you know. I'm really excited seeing folks' excitement about X-Men,
Mm.
the new X-Men animation using kind of like the vintage animation that's on Disney Plus. Because I'm seeing like just folks kind of geek out about it, get excited about it. I'm like, y'all, like, I know this is different from anime, but like it's like you can get into anime too and really get into it, you know? So it's not even a guilty pleasure. This is just, you know, I don't know. Like, I mean, we're going to get off this podcast. I'm going to make some oatmeal and I'm going to watch some anime. Like, that's it, right?
That's good. I'm glad.
I will
Good.
say this. Though. I will say this. I don't know. Have you seen Psych?
Yes.
Oh yeah, slapstick humor, like you know, problematic, very problematic in today's day and age. I think as far as the jokes they made, that's one of my comfort shows. Like I will watch Psych on repeat or Columbo. I love a good detective show. Columbo, a lot of folks don't know what that is. I'm probably a 60-year-old white man basically because I love Columbo, but I love that. Yeah, that's my jam.
I do know Psych, and Psych isn't it actually based in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, so it's supposed to be Santa
Yeah,
Barbara,
yeah.
but I think they actually recorded in British Columbia. Why do I know all that? We don't even need to get into it. But yeah, I was a big Psych fan.
Okay, I just remember being set in Santa Barbara, but yeah, I'd have watched Psych, and I've seen a little Columbo. That's a throwback, man. So
Yeah. Showing my age here,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned Love is Blind. That's one that I think folks who listen to the podcast know that my spouse and I watch, and we actually finished the most recent American season. But there's actually a season that they filmed in Sweden that
Oh, okay.
because
Wow.
apparently we're such fanatics, we also have to watch the Sweden season.
I love it. The
And
commitment.
yeah, and of course it's in Sweden. I mean, the people are Swedes mostly. There's one Finn, but they're Swedes, and so they speak in a language I definitely do not understand. But of course, it's like overdubbed and things like that. So, but anyway, that season's almost done, and they've committed to a second season.
Okay,
So we'll
okay.
see.
So you have more content. I love that.
Yeah, always more content with Netflix. But I'm glad you mentioned the X-Men thing because I have been enjoying, or I in the past I've enjoyed some of these movies, but I do like that animation style because I grew up with like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles
Yeah,
on
yeah,
TV, and of course like
yeah.
even like the Mario cartoon and
Mhm.
things like that. I'm old, in case people were wondering. And the other one I always mention is F1 Drive to Survive, which I learned about. It's on Netflix. I learned about it from a podcast and Helen Peterson's culture study podcast. And she had a guest on, a black woman who's into F1 and only got her F1 news from other women.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So
Yeah.
so this is like, in case folks don't know, this is like open wheel racing on tracks that are not those ovals that other racing series use. And they're really fast. They go up to like 215 or so miles per hour, which is pretty fast. And
Right.
the Drive to Survive, folks, the show it's a little bit about the racing, but it's mostly about the drama and the tension that happens behind the scenes. Because I think I mentioned this before, but there are 10 teams in Formula One, and each team has two drivers. So there are 20 athletes that are in the sport altogether.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So imagine how intense the pressure is when you're in one of those 20 seats, but the
Yeah.
pressure to keep that seat,
Oh, for
the
sure. Yeah.
tension and the competition to get access to those seats. And because I'm academic, I'm always thinking about, well, isn't this kind of like some academic circles, right? I mean, we compete over
Oh,
status, we
100%.
compete
Yeah, yeah,
over,
yeah. Yeah.
prizes, so to speak. We compete over space in top journals. We compete over graduate students. If we have a department with graduate students, we
Yeah.
compete over all kinds of things that at the end of the day, in some ways you can say these are like not very ultimately concerning. On the other hand, within the social world of, speaking of social worlds, within the social world of F1 or high level academics, like these are the things that are valued.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've never been in I haven't been in like the racing or F1, but I know a lot of folks are really kind of, I mean, it just kind of seemed like it appeared out of nowhere,
Yeah,
honestly. But yeah, this is fascinating.
totally. I've never been into it either. And I'm not even like, I have a Prius, okay? So I'm not out there like, I'm not out there,
Yeah.
not out there doing,
Look, we conserve energy. I love that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not out here doing like 100 miles an hour down the interstate or whatever, but it is super interesting. And I do think we'll probably see a lot more F1 races happen in the US. There's one right now in Austin every year, but I think we're likely to see quite a few more as the organization tries to
Yeah.
expand into the United States.
That's super interesting. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I see more folks like kind of talk about it on Twitter, but I haven't gotten into it.
All right. Well, you know, no pressure, Antar. But listen, I think it's been wonderful to talk to you. Anything else you want to
Yeah.
share?
No, I mean, I just want to share my gratitude. Thank you so much for letting me chat with you, and my gratitude to the listeners as well. Thank you all for listening, and yeah, thank you so much, Dan, just for engaging with my work. I really appreciate you.
Well, it's my pleasure. You've been listening to the Annex, a sociology podcast. Special thanks to Dr. Antar Tichavakunda. Thanks also to our producer, Patterson Troop, and to Joe Cohen, who directs the Queen's Podcast Lab. Music by Lena Orsa. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.